Brad Kowalski picked up the paper bag sitting on Walter's lap, didn't ask, didn't hesitate, and dropped it onto the floor like it was garbage he'd found on the sidewalk. The Bible inside hit the hardwood with a flat, heavy sound. He smoothed his apron, looked down at Walter with a smile that had no warmth anywhere in it. "Let me be real clear." Loud, deliberate. 3 nearby tables went silent. "A black man walks in here looking like he slept on a park bench, carrying a paper bag. No reservation. That's not our clientele. That will never be our clientele." Walter reached down for the Bible. Brad stepped on the bag, held it flat against the floor with the toe of his polished shoe, looked Walter dead in the eyes while he did it. "Nobody in this room knows your name, old man. Nobody in this room cares." He leaned down, face level with Walter's. "So crawl back to whatever corner of this city you came from, before I have you removed like the piece of trash you are." The pianist stopped playing. 50 people sat frozen. Walter looked up at Brad Kowalski, calm, steady, unhurried, and said 2 words: "I'll wait." He had no idea what was coming. But I promise you, by the end of this story, you will watch Brad Kowalski lose his career, his reputation, and cost his company $180 million. Before dinner service even started, it all began with a Bible on the floor. Don't move. This story gets worse before it gets better, and the ending will leave you speechless. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Stories like this every single week. To understand what happened inside the Meridian Club that Saturday afternoon, you need to understand who Walter Gaines really was. Not what he looked like standing in that doorway. Not the worn jacket or the paper bag or the bus transfer in his pocket. You need to understand the man underneath all of that, because Brad Kowalski saw a black man in an old coat and made every decision that followed from that single image. And that was the most expensive mistake of his life. Walter James Gaines was born in 1953 in a small house on Beatty's Ford Road in Charlotte, North Carolina. The third of 5 children. His father worked double shifts at a textile mill. His mother cleaned houses 6 days a week and sang in the church choir on the 7th. They didn't have much, but they had a table with food on it every night, and a mother who made sure every child in that house knew their worth before they walked out the front door each morning. Walter joined the United States Navy at 19, served from 1972 to 1976. He wasn't a war hero in the dramatic sense. No Purple Heart, no front-page story. He was something quieter than that. He was the kind of man who showed up, did the work, and came home with his integrity intact. When he was discharged, he came back to Charlotte with a certification in electrical systems and a discipline that never left him. He spent the next 4 decades as a master electrician, built a small but respected reputation across the city. Churches, schools, apartment complexes, city contracts. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he was a man who could look at anything he'd ever built and say he'd done it right. That mattered to him more than money ever did. He met Evelyn Crawford at a church picnic in 1979. She was 24 years old and laughing at something her cousin had said, and Walter stood 10 feet away and thought he had never in his life seen anything so worth walking toward. They married 8 months later. It was the best decision he ever made, and he knew it every single day for the 23 years they had together. Evelyn died of ovarian cancer in the spring of 2002. Dominic was 12 years old. Walter never remarried. Not because he stopped believing in love, but because what he'd had with Evelyn had been so complete, so specific to her, that the idea of replacing it felt dishonest. Instead, he poured everything, every hour, every dollar, every remaining piece of himself, into raising their son. Dominic Gaines grew up watching his father leave the house before sunrise and come home after dark. Watching him sit at the kitchen table on Sunday nights going over job estimates with a pencil and a yellow legal pad. Watching him press his work clothes the night before, polish his boots until they reflected the kitchen light, carry himself through a world that did not always make room for him with a dignity so steady it looked like it had been carved from something harder than bone. That was the education that mattered, not the classrooms, not the textbooks. The way his father moved through a world that underestimated him every single day without ever shrinking. Dominic went to college on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. Got his MBA. Built Gaines Capital Group from a 2-person office in South End, Charlotte, into a $3.1 billion private equity firm with offices in 4 cities. He was on the cover of Forbes at 38. He was 44 now, and the company was still growing. But every Saturday, without exception, he called his father. And 2 years ago, when he noticed Walter taking the bus to places he used to drive, he sat his father down and said, "Dad, I want you to have access to the things I have access to. Not because you can't take care of yourself, because you spent 30 years taking care of me and you deserve a Saturday lunch at a good table." He renewed his platinum membership at the Meridian Club in January. He added Walter to the guest registry that same afternoon. He noted it in the system with a personal authorization code, the equivalent of a standing invitation. What the system also showed, though neither Walter nor Dominic thought about it that morning, was that Walter Gaines had been listed as an authorized guest since March of 2019. 5 years. Dominic had added him the first time long before the conversation 2 years ago. Long before Walter's knees started bothering him. Long before the bus became a necessity rather than a choice. He had put his father's name in that system quietly, the way he did most things for Walter, without announcement, without expectation of gratitude, because it was simply the right thing to do. Walter had never come, not once in 5 years. Because Walter Gaines did not like to feel like a burden, and walking into a place like the Meridian Club on his son's membership felt, to him, like borrowing something that wasn't his. It took 2 years of Dominic's patience and 1 direct conversation to change his mind. This Saturday was the first time. He woke at 6:30, made coffee, read the first chapter of Psalms the way he did every morning, ironed his slacks, the dark charcoal ones Dominic had given him for Christmas, pressed his white button-down shirt, and laid out his brown work jacket. The elbows were worn. The color had faded from a deep mahogany to something closer to caramel. But it was pressed. It was clean, and on the left lapel, catching the morning light from the bedroom window, was a small bronze pin. A Navy veteran's insignia. Evelyn had pinned it there herself in the spring of 1977 and told him, "Wear it proud, Walter." He wore it every Saturday. He wrapped his Bible in a paper bag, an old habit, rain protection from years of carrying it on job sites, made sure he had his bus pass, and walked to the stop on his corner at 8:45. He arrived at the Meridian Club 12 minutes early. He straightened his jacket at the door, took 1 breath, and stepped inside. And before he had taken 3 steps past the threshold, Brad Kowalski was already moving toward him. Brad Kowalski had been the general manager of the Meridian Club for 10 months. In those 10 months, he had built a reputation among the staff as a man who ran a tight operation. Numbers were up. Complaints from the regular clientele were down. The regional director at Harrington Hospitality Partners had praised him twice in written evaluations. He had framed both of them and hung them in his office behind his desk, where anyone sitting across from him could not avoid seeing them. What those evaluations did not mention, what they had been carefully written to avoid, was the other reputation Brad had built. The one that lived in Denise Fraser's private notebook. The one that made Owen the busboy find reasons to be in the back of the house whenever certain guests walked through the front door. The one that had produced 3 formal HR complaints in 8 months, all of which had been routed to the regional office and returned with the same quiet instruction: handle it internally. Brad had a system. It wasn't written down anywhere. It didn't need to be. It lived in the way he positioned himself near the entrance on busy afternoons, in the way his eyes moved across incoming guests before they reached the hostess stand, in the half-second assessment he made before his face arranged itself into a welcome or a wall. Walter Gaines walked through the front door at 12:48 on a Saturday afternoon, and Brad's assessment took less than 3 seconds. Old black man, worn jacket, paper bag, no tie. He was moving before Walter had fully cleared the entrance. Denise was at the hostess stand. She saw Brad coming from across the room, recognized the walk, the set of his shoulders, and felt her stomach drop. She opened her mouth. Brad stepped directly in front of her without breaking stride, physically cutting her off from the entrance the way you'd step in front of a door you didn't want opened. "Sir?" His voice was polite in the way a closed gate is polite. Technically not hostile, completely impassable. "This is a private club, members only." Walter stopped, stood straight. "My son is a member. Dominic Gaines. I was told I'm on the guest list." Brad tilted his head. The gesture of a man performing patience he doesn't feel. He reached for the tablet on the stand beside him, the guest registry, and scrolled through it with the slow, theatrical deliberateness of someone who has already decided what conclusion they're going to reach and is simply making you watch them arrive at it. The name was there: Walter Gaines, authorized guest, platinum member sponsorship, personal authorization code from Dominic Gaines. Brad looked at it for 2 full seconds. Then he turned the tablet face down on the stand. "Anyone can put a name in a system," he said. Walter's expression didn't change. "My son added me himself. His name is Dominic Gaines. You can call him if you need to verify." "I'm sure I can." Brad's voice had a new quality now, something smoother, more practiced, the tone of a man who has done this before and knows exactly how far he can push before it becomes a problem he can't control. "But see, here's the thing. We have a standard here at the Meridian Club. Our members and their guests reflect a certain," he paused, chose the word carefully, "image, and right now, I have to be honest with you. You're not reflecting that image." He let his eyes travel down Walter's jacket, stopped at the elbows, looked at the paper bag, looked back up. "That bag," he said, pointing at it with one finger. "We don't allow outside food or beverages on the premises." "It's a Bible," Walter said. Brad didn't blink. "I don't care if it's the Constitution." That was the moment Carol Hutchins, seated 4 feet away at a window table, set down her menu. She had come in 20 minutes earlier with Raymond Chow for their usual Saturday lunch. She had a standing reservation, had been coming to the Meridian Club for 11 years. She knew every server by name, knew the piano player's repertoire, knew which tables got the afternoon light. She also knew Brad Kowalski. And she knew, from the way this conversation was being conducted, loud enough to perform, quiet enough to deny, exactly what was happening. She did not say anything yet, but she did not look away. Behind the kitchen pass-through, Denise had stopped moving. She stood with 2 plates in her hands, unable to make herself walk forward, unable to make herself walk back. She had her own history with Brad's system. She had documented 8 months of it in a notebook she kept in her locker. But documentation and intervention were two different things. She was 27 years old. Brad was her direct supervisor. She held the plates and watched. Then Brad turned, and Walter noticed it happen. The door opened behind him, and a family stepped in. Father, mother, two kids, maybe 8 and 10 years old. White. The father in a polo shirt and khakis. No reservation visible. No name mentioned. Brad's entire face changed. The tension left his shoulders. The performance of patience dissolved into something genuine and warm. He stepped around Walter as though Walter were a piece of furniture he was navigating, extended his hand to the father, and smiled the smile of a man greeting someone he was genuinely glad to see. "Welcome back. Table for 4? Absolutely, right this way." And he led them in. Past the tables, past the piano, toward the dining room. The family followed without a backward glance. Walter stood at the entrance. Alone now. Phil, the security guard, had materialized from somewhere to his left and was standing 3 feet away with his arms at his sides, not touching Walter, not speaking, just present in the way a wall is present. Brad returned 60 seconds later, looked at Walter as though mildly surprised he was still there. Then he leaned in close. His voice dropped. Carol Hutchins leaned forward in her chair. "And if he's still here in 5 minutes," Brad said to Phil, loudly enough to be heard, "call the real police, not just security." Phil looked at the floor. And that was when Walter looked down at his lapel, at the small bronze pin, at the insignia Evelyn had placed there in 1977. He looked at it for one moment. The way a man looks at something that reminds him of who he is when the world is doing its best to tell him otherwise. Brad had seen the pin earlier. Walter had watched his eyes stop on it, had watched him recognize it, and had watched him turn away without a word, as though it were nothing, as though it meant nothing. Walter straightened his jacket, sat down in the chair by the entrance, and did not leave. 7 minutes passed. 7 minutes during which Walter Gaines sat in a chair by the entrance of the Meridian Club, with a paper bag on his knee and a security guard standing 3 feet to his left, and 50 people in the dining room, finding reasons not to look directly at him. 7 minutes during which Brad Kowalski moved through the room with the easy confidence of a man on familiar ground, checking in with tables, exchanging pleasantries with regulars, refreshing a water glass here, approving a dessert substitution there, performing competence, performing control. Denise had finally made herself move. She delivered the 2 plates she'd been holding to a table near the window, smiled at the guests, and walked back toward the service station along the wall. She did not look at Brad. She did not look at Walter. She looked at the middle distance the way people look when they are trying to hold themselves together in a situation that is pulling them apart. Owen the busboy stood at the service station, pretending to reorganize a stack of linen napkins that did not need reorganizing. He was 19 years old and had worked at the Meridian Club for 4 months. In those 4 months, he had seen Brad turn away 3 other guests at the door. He had told himself each time that he hadn't seen enough to say anything. He had told himself that again this afternoon. He was running out of times he could tell himself that. At the window table, Raymond Chow had opened the voice memo app on his phone and set it face down on the tablecloth between his water glass and Carol's wine. The red recording dot blinked silently. Raymond had been a civil rights attorney for 26 years. He had learned a long time ago to record first and think about the implications later. Brad finished his loop of the dining room and came back to the entrance. He stopped in front of Walter. He looked down at him the way you look at a stain you were hoping had dried up on its own. "Still here," he said. "Still here," Walter said. Something shifted in Brad's face then. Not anger exactly. Something colder than anger. The expression of a man who has decided that the performance of patience is over and what comes next is simply a matter of efficiency. He stepped closer, close enough that his shadow fell across Walter's hands. His voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to the particular register of a public humiliation designed to be heard by the surrounding tables while maintaining the deniability of a private conversation. I don't know what neighborhood you wandered in from, old man. Each word placed with care. But people like you? He paused. Let the pause do its work. You're trash, and trash doesn't belong in a place like this. The piano stopped, not because anyone signaled the pianist, not because the song ended. Marcus, the 24-year-old pianist who had been playing the same jazz standard for the last 20 minutes, simply stopped mid-phrase because his hands had gone still on the keys without his permission. His brain had processed what he'd just heard and sent a signal down his arms that overrode everything else. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Carol Hutchins did not reach for her wine glass. She did not move at all. Her eyes were fixed on Brad with an expression that had passed through shock and was now somewhere on the far side of it, in a territory that was quieter and more dangerous. Raymond's hand moved instinctively to his phone. He didn't pick it up. He just confirmed, with the tips of his fingers, that it was still recording. At the service station, Owen set down the napkins he had been folding. He set them down slowly, precisely, in the manner of someone who needs their hands to do something deliberate, while their mind catches up to what they've just witnessed. Then he stood completely still. Denise, halfway between the kitchen and the dining room, stopped walking. The tray in her hands leveled itself. Her jaw tightened. In 8 months, she had heard a great many things from Brad Kowalski. She had written them all down. But she had never heard that word. Not in a room full of people. Not directed at a 71-year-old man with a Bible in his lap. She thought about her notebook in the locker. She thought about the 3 HR complaints that had gone nowhere. She thought about every time she had told herself that documenting was enough, that someone above her would eventually do something, that she didn't have to be the one to make this her problem. She was done telling herself that. Walter did not stand up, did not raise his voice, did not clench his fists. He looked at Brad Kowalski for a long, steady moment. The look of a man who has just heard something that confirmed what he already knew about the world and is deciding what to do with that confirmation. Then he looked down at his jacket lapel, at the bronze pin. He thought about Evelyn, about her hands placing that pin in 1977, about the way she had looked at him that morning, like he was worth every good thing the world had to offer, like any room he walked into became better for having him in it. He thought about Dominic at 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while Walter went over job estimates. The way the boy would look up sometimes and just watch his father work, not saying anything, just watching. Then Walter reached into the paper bag, took out his Bible, opened it to the page he had marked that morning, and began to read. Brad stared at him. The response he had expected, tears, anger, a hasty exit, some form of visible collapse, had not come. What had come instead was a 71-year-old man reading scripture in the chair by the door, as peacefully as if he were sitting in his own living room. Brad's nostrils flared, his neck flushed red above his collar. He turned to Phil. I said call the real police. Phil looked at Walter, looked at the Bible open in his lap, looked at the bronze pin on his lapel. He did not reach for his radio. Brad turned back to Walter one more time. His voice dropped to something that was barely above a breath, but was still, somehow, designed to be heard. Nobody is coming for you, old man. Nobody in this room is going to help you. You are sitting in that chair with your little book, and the only place you're going is out that door." Walter turned a page. He did not look up. And from the window table, Carol Hutchins pushed back her chair and stood up. Carol Hutchins stood up slowly, the way a person stands when they have made a decision and are no longer interested in the consequences of making it. She was 63 years old. She had grown up in Charlotte, raised 2 children here, buried a husband here. She had been coming to the Meridian Club for 11 years and had watched it change management 3 times. She had seen a great many things in this room and said nothing about most of them because saying nothing was easier and because she had told herself each time that it wasn't her place. She was done telling herself that too. Brad. Her voice was level, not loud. She didn't need volume. The room was so quiet that a normal speaking voice carried to every corner of it. "This man is on the guest list. I heard you check it myself. I watched you find his name and turn the tablet over. He is a registered guest of a platinum member, and you have been standing here for the better part of 10 minutes, treating him like a criminal." Brad turned to look at her. The expression on his face was the particular expression of a man who has been interrupted mid-performance and is recalculating how to bring the audience back. "Mrs. Hutchins, I appreciate your concern, but this is a staffing matter, and it is not a staffing matter." She took one step toward him. "It is a decency matter, and right now, this club has a serious deficiency of it." A murmur moved through the nearest tables. Not agreement exactly, something more uncomfortable than that. The sound of people who have been watching something they knew was wrong and are now being asked, by the mere fact of one woman standing up, to decide what that says about them. Brad's jaw tightened. He looked at Carol with the controlled fury of a man who cannot afford to lose his composure in front of the dining room, but is very close to losing it anyway. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your table." Carol looked at him for one more moment. Then she looked at Walter. She nodded once, a small, specific nod, the kind that means, "I see you. You are not invisible here." Then she sat back down, because Raymond had his hand on her wrist and was applying the gentle, steady pressure of a man who has been in enough rooms like this to know when a gesture has done its work, and when pushing further makes things worse for the person you're trying to help. Walter had watched all of this from his chair. He had not moved. His Bible was still open in his lap. But his eyes had lifted from the page when Carol stood, and they had stayed up. He looked at the dining room now, at the frozen tables, at Denise standing still against the far wall, at Owen with his hands at his sides, at Phil who had still not reached for his radio, at the pianist, Marcus, sitting at the keys with his hands in his lap, looking at the floor. 50 people. Not one of them had done what Carol had done. Not one of them had stood up before she did. Walter understood this. He did not blame them for it. He had lived 71 years in this country, and he understood exactly what it cost a person to stand up in a room like this. And he understood even better what it cost them to stay seated. Both prices were real. Both left marks. He looked down at his phone. He did not want to make this call. This was the truest thing in the room at that moment. Truer than Brad's cruelty. Truer than the silence of 50 witnesses. Truer than the bronze pin on his lapel. Walter Gaines did not want to call his son. Not because he was afraid. Not because he doubted Dominic would come. But because calling Dominic meant admitting that he needed help. And Walter had spent 40 years being the person other people called when they needed help. Becoming the person who made that call felt like a door closing on something he wasn't ready to lose. He sat with the phone in his hand for 4 full minutes. Brad had retreated to the hostess stand. He was watching Walter from across the room with his arms crossed, with the patient, contemptuous energy of a man who has decided that time is on his side. that sooner or later the old man in the chair would get tired and leave, and this whole inconvenient afternoon would resolve itself without further disruption to the dinner service. Denise took 2 steps toward Walter. She had a glass of water in her hand. She made it 4 feet before Brad's voice cut across the room like a switch snapping. "Denise, get back to your section." She stopped. Her fingers tightened around the glass. She looked at Walter. She looked at the water in her hand. She set the glass down on the nearest table. Not her section, not her responsibility, just the nearest flat surface, and walked back to the service station with her eyes straight ahead and her jaw locked so tight her teeth ached. Walter watched her go. Then he opened his flip phone, dialed. 1 ring. Dominic picked up before the second. The dining room was quiet enough that the nearest tables could hear the faint sound of a voice on the other end, though not the words. Walter's voice, when he spoke, was steady, careful, the voice of a man editing himself in real time, trying to give his son the facts without the weight of them. "Son, I'm at your club." A pause. "There's a man here. He won't let me in. He said some things." Another pause, shorter. "I'm fine. I didn't want to bother you." His voice dropped then, just slightly, just enough to tell anyone listening that this next sentence had cost him something to say. "He called me trash, Dominic." Silence on the other end. Then Walter said very quietly, "I know. I'll wait." He folded the phone, placed it on his knee beside the Bible, looked up at the room. Brad, from across the entrance, let out a short laugh through his nose, turned to Phil and said it low, but not low enough. "Great. The cavalry's coming." He said it with the absolute confidence of a man who has never once in his life had to reckon with what cavalry actually looks like when it arrives. He had no idea. Dominic Gaines was in his home office in Myers Park when the call came in. The house was a 7,000-square-foot federal style on a tree-lined street 3 miles from uptown Charlotte. His office was on the 2nd floor, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk his father had helped him move in 8 years ago, 2 monitors running live market data. He had been reviewing acquisition documents for a deal his team was closing in Nashville. A stack of folders, 3 cups of coffee deep into a Saturday afternoon, no plans to move until evening. When the phone rang and he saw his father's name on the screen, he picked up immediately. He always picked up immediately when his father called. Not because Walter called often. Walter called sparingly, almost apologetically, the way a man calls who has spent a lifetime not wanting to be a burden, but because of that exact reason. When Walter called, it mattered. He listened to his father's voice, heard the careful steadiness in it, heard, underneath that steadiness, the thing Walter was trying not to say as loudly as he was saying everything else. "He called me trash, Dominic." Dominic did not respond immediately. He sat for 3 seconds in absolute silence, not the silence of a man who doesn't know what to say. The silence of a man who is deciding, with great precision, what to do first. Across the desk, his chief of staff Marcus Webb looked up from his laptop. He had worked with Dominic for 6 years. He had learned to read the quality of his silences the way a sailor reads weather. This one made him close his laptop without being asked. "I know," Dominic said into the phone. "I'll wait." Then he ended the call. He looked at Marcus. "The Meridian Club. My father is at the door. The floor manager refused him entry and called him trash. I need everything on Brad Kowalski in the next 5 minutes. Employment history, complaint record, anything HR has ever touched. And I need you to pull the Harrington Hospitality Partners file." Marcus was already typing. Dominic opened his admin access to the Meridian Club's membership system on his secondary monitor. As a platinum member, he had full guest registry visibility. He found his father's name in under 30 seconds. Walter Gaines, authorized guest, platinum sponsorship, personal authorization code, active. He also saw something that gave him a moment's pause. The registration timestamp. His father had been listed in the guest registry since March of 2019. 5 years. Dominic remembered adding him. A quiet decision, made without announcement. The first year he'd held the platinum membership. He had never mentioned it to Walter. He hadn't wanted to make it a conversation about charity or obligation. He had simply put his father's name in the system and waited for the day Walter would decide to use it. The day had apparently arrived. 5 years later, on a Saturday in autumn, with a worn jacket and a Bible in a paper bag and a floor manager who had looked at all of that and seen trash, Marcus looked up. Kowalski, 10 months at the Meridian Club. Prior to that, 3 years at a Harrington property in Raleigh. Reason for transfer listed as operational restructuring. HR file has 3 formal complaints in the last 8 months. All 3 routed to regional. All 3 marked resolved with no disciplinary action recorded. He paused. Denise Frazier filed 2 of them. A server named Owen filed the 3rd. Dominic looked at his screen. Harrington file. Harrington Hospitality Partners holds the Meridian Club and 37 other properties across the Southeast. Marcus pulled the document. Current financial position. They are in the 30-day review window of a refinancing agreement. $180 million. The agreement is being managed through Gaines Capital's affiliate fund. We have a withdrawal clause active until the window closes. He looked up. Which is in 11 days. Dominic stood up, put on his jacket, picked up his leather portfolio from the corner of the desk. Draft the withdrawal letter, he said. Single page, clean. Have it printed and in my hand in 4 minutes. Marcus was already at the printer. While it ran, Dominic sent a text to his attorney, Priya Nair. 4 sentences. The situation, the evidence available, the likely causes of action, and the instruction to be ready to file by end of business. Priya responded in 90 seconds with 2 words. Already drafting. He picked up the printed letter. Read it once. Folded it into his portfolio. He drove himself. No driver, no security detail. The same matte black Audi he used on weekends when he didn't want to be a production. 12 minutes from Myers Park to the Meridian Club in Midtown. He drove the speed limit. He did not turn on the radio. He thought about his father on the bus this morning, getting up early, ironing his clothes, polishing his shoes, putting on the jacket with the pin. Going through all of that preparation for a quiet Saturday lunch and encountering instead a man who looked at 71 years of dignity and called it trash. He thought about the 3 HR complaints that had gone nowhere, about a regional office that had received documented evidence of a pattern and responded with silence, about a system that had decided Brad Kowalski's performance metrics were worth more than the people he was grinding underneath them. He parked on the street, walked to the entrance, straightened his jacket once at the door, the same gesture his father had made that morning. Though neither of them knew the other had done it, he pushed open the door of the Meridian Club. The room felt it before anyone saw him. A shift in atmospheric pressure, subtle and immediate. The way a room feels when something that has been building toward a conclusion has finally arrived at one. Then the heads turned, and the whispers started. That's Dominic Gaines. Dominic Gaines walked through the front door of the Meridian Club at 1:47 in the afternoon, and the first thing he did was find his father. Not Brad. Not the hostess stand. Not the dining room full of people who had been watching this unfold for the better part of an hour. His father first. Everything else second. Walter was still in the chair by the entrance, Bible open, hands steady, The paper bag on the floor beside his feet where Brad had dropped it 45 minutes ago. He had not picked it up. He had not moved from the chair. He had done exactly what he told Dominic he would do. He had waited. Dominic crossed the entrance in 8 steps and crouched down in front of his father's chair. Not beside him. In front of him. At eye level. The way you get down in front of someone when you want them to know, without any ambiguity, that you are here and you are looking at them and nothing else in the room matters more than this. He looked at his father's face, at the pressed collar of the white button-down, at the jacket with the worn elbows, at the bronze pin on the lapel catching the light from the window, at the hands that had spent 40 years doing honest work and were now resting, perfectly calm, on the open pages of a Bible. His jaw tightened, one muscle once along the side of his face. That was the only visible sign of what was happening inside him. "You okay, Dad?" he said. Walter looked at his son for a moment. The look of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has just been offered the chance to set it down. "I'm fine, son," he said. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." Dominic put his hand briefly on his father's knee. Then he stood up. He turned around. Brad Kowalski was standing at the hostess stand 8 feet away. He had recognized Dominic the moment he walked through the door. The recognition had moved across his face in a visible wave, starting with a slight widening of the eyes and ending somewhere in the vicinity of his throat. But he had recovered, or told himself he had. He was standing with his arms loosely crossed, chin up, projecting the confidence of a man on his own territory who has handled difficult situations before and is prepared to handle this one. "Sir," Brad said. His voice was smooth, professionally calibrated. "If you're here about the guest situation, I want to assure you we can discuss this in a calm, professional manner. Our policy requires—" "My name is Dominic Gaines," Dominic said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room was already quiet enough that a normal speaking voice reached every corner of it. "This is my father, Walter Gaines. He is a registered guest under my Platinum membership. His name has been in your system since 2019. He presented himself at this entrance at 12:48 this afternoon, was refused entry, despite being on the guest list, was held at the door for over 40 minutes, and was called," he paused, one beat, "trash by you in front of this room." Brad opened his mouth, closed it. "Sir, I think there may have been a misunderstanding about—" Dominic opened his portfolio. He placed a single folded document on the reception desk between them. He did not slide it across dramatically. He simply placed it there, the way you place a fact in front of someone, without ceremony, without theater, because the fact is sufficient on its own. "This is a formal withdrawal notice to Harrington Hospitality Partners," Dominic said. "Gaines Capital is withdrawing from the refinancing agreement currently in review. $180 million. Effective 5 p.m. today. The 30-day review window permits it. My attorneys filed the preliminary notice 18 minutes ago." The crack that moved across Brad Kowalski's face in that moment was not dramatic. It didn't shatter. It was more like the first fracture in a windshield, hairline thin, running from one point to another in an instant, and once you saw it, you could not unsee it, and you knew that the whole thing was compromised now, that whatever force had been holding it together was no longer adequate to the task. His mouth moved. Nothing came out. From the window table, Raymond Chow stood up. He was unhurried about it, the practiced calm of a man who has spent 26 years walking into rooms where things have already gone wrong and has learned that urgency is almost never your friend in those moments. "Mr. Gaines," Raymond said. "My name is Raymond Chow. I'm a civil rights attorney. I want you to know that I have this entire incident on audio recording, from the moment your father arrived at the door. He held up his phone. The red dot was still blinking. 22 minutes, including the word used. Dominic looked at Raymond, looked at the phone, then looked back at Brad. Brad was looking at the phone as though it were a species of animal he had never encountered before and was only now understanding was venomous. Then something else happened. Something that changed the temperature of the room a second time. Denise Fraser walked out from the service station. She was not running. She was not shaking. Or rather, she was shaking. But she had decided that the shaking was not going to stop her. That she had been waiting 8 months for a moment when the cost of speaking was lower than the cost of silence. And that moment had arrived, and she was not going to let it pass. She was carrying a folded piece of paper. She walked directly to Dominic and held it out. "Mr. Gaines," she said. "My name is Denise Fraser. I've been a server here for 8 months. This is a log I've been keeping." Her voice broke on the last word, and she steadied it. Dates, incidents, names, quotes, 11 entries. 3 of them are formal HR complaints I filed myself. She glanced at Brad, looked back at Dominic. Nobody did anything. Dominic took the paper, looked at it, looked at Denise. "Thank you," he said. Brad stared at the log in Dominic's hands. He recognized Denise's handwriting. He had seen it on 2 of the 3 HR complaints that had come back to him marked resolved. He had told himself at the time that those complaints were manageable, that documentation without consequence was just paper, that the system had made its decision and he was on the right side of it. He had been wrong about the system. He had been wrong about the paper, and he had been catastrophically, irreversibly wrong about the old man in the chair by the door. His hands, at his sides, had begun to tremble. But that was not the last thing that happened before Brad Kowalski's world finished collapsing. Because Dominic had not yet seen the photograph, and Denise had not yet opened her phone to show him the group chat. And the message Brad had sent 40 minutes ago, the one with Walter's picture attached, the one with the caption about the shelter, was still sitting in 11 employees' inboxes, undeleted, time-stamped, and about to become the most damaging piece of evidence in the entire case. Denise unlocked her phone with hands that had stopped trembling. Something had settled in hers the moment she handed Dominic the log. A stillness that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having moved through it and come out the other side. She opened the group chat, scrolled to the message sent at 1:17 p.m., turned the screen to face Dominic. He looked at it for 4 seconds. The photograph showed his father from the side, Walter in the chair by the entrance, head bowed over his Bible, magi hair silver in the afternoon light coming through the front window, the brown jacket, the paper bag on the floor, the bronze pin on the lapel, too small to make out clearly but present, catching a fragment of light. Underneath the photograph, Brad's caption, "Current situation at the front. LOL. Anyone know which shelter this one escaped from? Timestamp, 1:17 p.m. Sent to a group chat titled Meridian Floor Staff containing 11 names. Dominic looked at the screen for 4 seconds. Then he handed the phone back to Denise. He did not look at Brad. He called Priya Nair. She picked up on the first ring. He put it on speaker. His voice was the same volume it had been for the entire conversation, measured even, stripped of everything except the information it needed to carry. "Priya, we have a photograph taken by the floor manager of my father sitting in a chair, sent to a staff group chat with a caption mocking him. Time-stamped during the incident. Add it to the filing. Racial harassment, hostile environment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. I want it all. His name personally and Harrington Hospitality Partners corporately." Priya's voice came back flat and immediate. "Filed by end of business. I'll need the screenshot preserved. Tell the witness not to delete anything. She knows, Dominic said. He looked at Denise. She nodded once. He ended the call. The room had been quiet before. Now it was something beyond quiet. It was the silence of a place where everyone present understands simultaneously that they are witnessing something that will not stay inside these walls. That what has happened in this room on this Saturday afternoon will move outward into the world and keep moving, and that their presence here makes them part of it, whether they chose to be or not. Brad Kowalski had not moved from his position behind the reception desk. His arms were no longer crossed. They hung at his sides in the particular way that arms hang when the body has run out of poses to strike. The folder manager's confidence, the thing that had carried him through 11 months of unchecked behavior, through 3 ignored HR complaints, through 45 minutes of calculated cruelty toward a 71-year-old man reading scripture in a chair, had not left him dramatically. It had drained, slowly, degree by degree, the way heat leaves a room when a window has been left open in winter. He was aware of the dining room, of 50 faces that were no longer pretending to look elsewhere, of Carol Hutchins at the window table with her hands folded on the tablecloth, watching him with an expression that was not triumphant, not satisfied, not cruel, just the clear-eyed, steady gaze of a woman who has seen enough and is no longer willing to look away from any of it. He was aware of Denise, standing 3 feet from him with her phone in her hand, the screenshot preserved, her 8 months of documentation now in the hands of a civil rights attorney. He was aware of Owen the busboy, who had stopped pretending to do anything at all and was simply standing at the service station with his arms at his sides, watching. He was aware of Raymond Chow's phone on the window table, red dot still blinking, and he was aware, with a clarity that arrived too late to be useful, that the photograph had been the mistake that collapsed everything else. Not the word, not the refusal of entry, not the 45 minutes of deliberate humiliation. Those things could be argued over, contextualized, attributed to misunderstanding or poor judgment, or the general imprecision of language in difficult situations. The photograph could not be argued over. The caption could not be contextualized. You could not look at a picture of a 71-year-old black veteran sitting quietly in a chair, reading his Bible, and the words which shelter did this one escape from, and find a frame that made it into anything other than what it was. Brad opened his mouth. His attorney would later advise him, in a consultation that cost $400 and lasted 22 minutes, that whatever he said in that room in that moment should have been nothing. That the single most valuable thing he could have done was close his mouth and wait for representation. His attorney was correct. Brad did not take that advice. "Mr. Gaines," he said. His voice had a new quality, thinner, compressed, like something being squeezed through a space too small for it. "Please, I have a family. I didn't mean it the way it—" He stopped, swallowed. "He just didn't look like—" He stopped again. He heard himself. He heard what the next word was going to be. He heard it before he said it, and understood, in the half-second before it would have left his mouth, that saying it would be the final nail in a coffin that was already built and sealed and had his name on it. But the pause itself was enough. The unfinished sentence hung in the air of the Meridian Club dining room, and every person present heard the word that had not been said and understood exactly what it was. Dominic looked at him. One long, level look. "Like what?" he said. One word at a time, each one its own sentence. Brad said nothing. From the back of the room, a chair scraped against the hardwood. The regional director of Harrington Hospitality Partners, reached by Marcus Webb on the phone 12 minutes earlier and now patched into a live call through Dominic's portfolio speaker, spoke 4 words into the silence. "Brad." You're suspended, immediately. Phil the security guard took one quiet step away from the entrance and returned to his post by the far wall. He could not bring himself to look at Brad. He looked at the floor instead and kept his eyes there. Owen picked up a glass of water from the service station, walked to Walter's chair, held it out with both hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, can I get you a table?" Walter Gaines looked at the glass of water in Owen's hands. Then he looked at the boy's face. 19 years old, eyes wet at the corners, jaw tight with the specific tension of someone who has watched something wrong happen for a long time and has finally, at the last possible moment, done the one small right thing available to him. Walter understood that. He understood it completely. He had been 19 once, in a world that presented you daily with moments where the cost of doing the right thing felt impossible to calculate, and the cost of doing nothing felt like something you could survive. He had not always gotten it right himself. He did not hold other people's wrong silences against them the way some men did. He simply noted them, the way you note weather, not with anger but with understanding of what conditions produce what outcomes. He took the glass of water. "Thank you, son," he said. Owen's exhale was audible. "The window seat just opened up," Owen said. If you'd like it." Walter looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at his father. Something passed between them that required no words. The specific wordless language of a parent and child who have spent enough years together that certain communications have moved entirely below the level of speech. Walter closed his Bible, placed it carefully in the paper bag, picked up the bag from the floor where Brad had dropped it 48 minutes ago. Stood up. He stood slowly, with the deliberate care of a 71-year-old man whose knees had opinions about sudden movements. But when he was upright, he was fully upright, shoulders back, chin level, the brown jacket with the worn elbows sitting square on his frame, and the bronze pin on the lapel catching the afternoon light from the window exactly as it had when he left his house that morning. He looked at Owen. "I think I will," he said. Owen led them through the dining room, past the tables of people who had been watching at 12:48, and were now watching still, but differently. Not with the frozen discomfort of witnesses to something they didn't want to see, but with the particular attentiveness of people who understand they are present at something they will remember. The room was still quiet, but it was a different quality of quiet now, not the silence of complicity, something closer to the silence of reckoning. Walter sat down at the window table. White tablecloth, afternoon light, the view of the street outside where the city moved at its usual Saturday pace, entirely unaware of what had just happened 40 feet away. Dominic sat across from him. Owen set 2 menus on the table and stepped back. Walter put the paper bag on the seat beside him, opened the menu, read it for a moment, then looked up at his son. "The salmon looks good," he said. Dominic smiled. For the first time since he had walked through the door, something in his face released. "Get the salmon." From the window table, where she had been sitting for the last hour, Carol Hutchins caught the attention of their server and said quietly, "Send a bottle of the Chablis to the gentleman by the window and his son. Tell them it's from me." She did not make a production of it. She did not walk over and introduce herself and require them to receive her gesture as a performance. She simply sent it and returned to her conversation with Raymond, because some apologies are best made without demanding acknowledgement. The bottle arrived. Walter looked at it, looked at Carol across the room. She raised her water glass very slightly. He nodded once. That was all. It was enough. What happened in the following 48 hours moved with the particular speed of things that have been waiting a long time to move. Denise's log went to Harrington's HR department that evening, not routed through regional management this time. but sent directly to the corporate compliance office by Priya Nair as part of the evidence package. 11 documented incidents over 8 months. 2 formal HR complaints previously marked, resolved without action. A paper trail that read, in its totality, not like a series of isolated incidents, but like a policy, a culture, a choice made repeatedly by a man who had been protected from its consequences by people who valued his performance metrics above everything else he was doing. Raymond Chow submitted his audio recording to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Human Relations Commission the following morning. 22 minutes and 17 seconds. The intake officer listened to the first 4 minutes and flagged it for priority review. By Monday, Priya had filed in full. Racial discrimination, hostile environment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Battery, because Brad's act of dropping the Bible from Walter's lap onto the floor constituted, under North Carolina statute, offensive physical contact without consent. The complaint named Brad Kowalski personally and Harrington Hospitality Partners corporately. The discovery process took 6 weeks. What it uncovered was worse than the filing had anticipated. In addition to Denise's log, 2 former servers came forward. One described being instructed by Brad to watch tables with black guests closely because, in Brad's words, they tend to walk out on checks. The other described being told to seat black diners away from the window, near the kitchen or the restrooms, because, again, in Brad's words, it doesn't look right for the brand. Both statements were sworn. Both were consistent with Denise's documentation. Both pointed to the same conclusion that the log had already established. This was not one bad afternoon. This was how Brad Kowalski ran the Meridian Club every day for 10 months, while 3 HR complaints gathered dust in a regional filing system and a VP wrote emails about keeping the numbers up. And then came the emails. Priya's team subpoenaed Harrington's internal communications. Buried in a chain between the regional director and a VP of operations named Gerald Marsh was a message dated 7 months before the incident. Elena's second complaint was attached. Beneath it, Marsh had written 6 words that became, when projected on a screen in a Charlotte courthouse 3 months later, the most damaging 6 words in the entire case. His numbers are good. Leave it. 3 weeks after the filing, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, Brad Kowalski sat across a table from Priya Nair. His attorney sat beside him. Priya slid a single document across the table. Brad read the first line. His attorney put his head in his hands. It was over. The settlement arrived as a wire transfer on a Thursday morning. $2.8 million from Harrington Hospitality Partners, paid without admission of liability, but with the full understanding of everyone present in every room where this had been discussed, that the liability was not in question and had not been for some time. Dominic's attorney Priya Nair called him when it cleared. He thanked her, ended the call, and sat for a moment at the desk in his home office. The same desk, the same room, where he had been sitting 11 weeks earlier when his father called from a chair by a door to say that a man had called him trash. Then he called his father. Walter picked up on the 3rd ring. He had been in the backyard. Dominic could hear the sound of outdoor air in the background, the ambient quiet of a Saturday morning. "It's settled," Dominic said. A pause. "How much?" $2.8 million. Another pause, longer. Walter's voice, when it came back, was careful. "That's a lot of money, son." "It is. What are you going to do with it?" Dominic had already decided. He had decided, in fact, on the drive home from the Meridian Club 11 weeks ago, before the filing, before the discovery, before the settlement negotiations had even begun. He had decided it sitting in traffic on Independence Boulevard, thinking about his father standing up from that chair, with his Bible in his paper bag and his bronze pin on his lapel, and walking through a room of 50 people to a window table because a 19-year-old busboy had offered it to him. "I'm naming a scholarship fund after you and Mom," he said. "The Evelyn and Walter Gaines Foundation. Trade school, vocational education, first-generation students in Charlotte. We're going to fund it with the settlement, and I'm going to match it from Gaines Capital." Silence on Walter's end. Long enough that Dominic checked the call was still connected. "Name it after your mother first," Walter said finally. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was holding something too large to say all at once. "Evelyn and Walter. Her name first." "Evelyn and Walter," Dominic said. "Yes, sir." The Evelyn and Walter Gaines Foundation was announced publicly the following Tuesday. $8 million. The Gaines Capital match doubled the settlement funds. 40-year scholarships budgeted across electrical certification programs, culinary arts, HVAC, automotive technology, and construction management. Priority given to students from the neighborhoods where Walter had worked for 4 decades. The same streets, the same schools, the same corners where he had learned that honest work done right was its own form of dignity. The announcement ran in the Charlotte Observer on Wednesday morning. By Thursday, it had been picked up nationally. By the weekend, donation inquiries had come in from 11 cities. Harrington Hospitality Partners, under the terms of the settlement, was required to implement a mandatory civil rights compliance overhaul across all 38 properties, an independent compliance officer reporting directly to the board, a transparent complaint system with guaranteed response timelines, full staff retraining across every property, and a formal public apology, not a press release drafted by a communications team, but a video statement from the CEO, recorded and posted to every platform, naming what had happened and what it had cost and what would change. Gerald Marsh, the VP of Operations, who had written, "His numbers are good. Leave it," submitted his resignation the day before the settlement was announced. The resignation was accepted with the particular corporate efficiency reserved for situations where the alternative is being fired in a manner that invites further litigation. The regional director was demoted, removed from client-facing operations, placed in an administrative role with a title that was longer than his actual responsibilities. Brad Kowalski was terminated from Harrington Hospitality Partners, permanently barred from all 38 properties. His name, when entered into any standard background check system, returned 430,000 search results. Every one of them connected to the incident, the photograph, the settlement, and the word he had used on a Saturday afternoon about a man whose son's name he had not thought to look up. He deleted his social media accounts in stages. First Instagram, then Facebook, then LinkedIn. By the time he deleted the last one, there was nothing left to delete because everything had already been screenshotted and archived and posted elsewhere by people he had never met and would never meet. The photograph he had taken of Walter, the one sent to the staff group chat with the shelter caption, had been shared 2.3 million times before he thought to ask anyone whether it could be removed. It could not be removed. Denise Frazier was promoted. Harrington's new compliance officer reviewed her file, read her 8 months of documentation, and recommended her floor manager at a renovated Harrington property opening in the Noda neighborhood of Charlotte. On her first day, she framed a small card and placed it on her desk where anyone sitting across from her could read it. The card said, "Every complaint matters, especially the ones nobody acted on." Owen received a letter 3 weeks after the settlement. It came on Gaines Capital letterhead and contained a recommendation letter signed by Dominic personally and a notice of a partial scholarship to Johnson and Wales University's Hospitality Management Program. Owen read the letter twice, folded it, and put it in the same drawer where he kept his mother's birthday cards. Raymond Chow donated the equivalent of his consulting fees for the month, $12,000, to the Evelyn and Walter Gaines Foundation. He did not announce it. Priya Nair found out 6 months later and called him to ask why he hadn't mentioned it. Because it wasn't about being mentioned, he said. Carol Hutchins wrote a letter. It was published in the Charlotte Observer on a Sunday, 3 weeks after the settlement. The title was, "I Should Have Stood Up Sooner." It was not a long letter. It was 4 paragraphs. It described what she had seen and what she had done and what she wished she had done earlier. It did not congratulate itself. It ended with one sentence. If you are ever sitting in a room where something wrong is happening, the fact that you are uncomfortable is not the same as the fact that you acted. The letter was shared 1.1 million times. 6 months after the afternoon at the Meridian Club, on a Saturday morning in early spring, Walter Gaines woke at 6:30, made coffee, read the first chapter of Psalms, ironed his slacks, pressed his white button down, put on the brown jacket with the worn elbows, pinned the bronze insignia to the lapel. He took the bus to the Meridian Club, arrived 12 minutes early, walked through the front door, was greeted by name by the hostess, a young woman named Tara, who had started 2 months after the incident and had read about it during her onboarding training, because it was now part of the onboarding training. He sat at the window table, ordered the salmon, read a chapter of his Bible after, watched the street outside where Charlotte moved at its usual Saturday pace. He did this every Saturday. Not because anyone asked him to, not because he was making a point, but because it was a good table and the salmon was excellent and he had earned a quiet Saturday lunch and he intended to have one. One Saturday, a new server, 22 years old, first week on the floor, came to refill his water and asked, making conversation the way new servers do, "Sir, do you come here often?" Walter looked up from his Bible, considered the question with the genuine seriousness he gave to most things. "My son is a member," he said, "but I come for myself." He smiled. She smiled back. She refilled his water and moved to the next table. The afternoon light came through the window and lay across the white tablecloth and the open Bible and the worn leather cover of a book that had been to a Navy base and 40 years of job sites, and a chair by a door where a man had once tried to make Walter Gaines feel like he did not belong. The bronze pin on his lapel caught the light, the same as it always had, the same as it always would. Brad Kowalski called Walter Gaines trash. What he did not know, what he could not see, was that the man sitting in that chair had built something Brad would never have. A son who drove across town on a Saturday afternoon, walked into a room full of people, and knelt down in front of his father's chair to ask one question. "You okay, Dad?" That is not something you buy. That is not something a title gives you. That is 40 years of getting up before sunrise and coming home after dark and pressing your clothes the night before and carrying yourself through a world that underestimates you without ever, not once, letting it convince you that it's right. Some people measure a man by where he sits. Walter Gaines measured himself by how he stood up, not dramatically, not for applause, just quietly, with his Bible in his hand and his pin on his lapel, in the full knowledge that he had done nothing wrong and was not going to pretend otherwise for anyone's comfort. If this story stayed with you, if Walter's dignity moved something in you, drop a comment and tell me why. And tell me where you're watching from. I read every one. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because we tell stories like this every week. Stories about people who refuse to be erased. You don't want to miss the next one.